Ding, ding.
All right, we're recording. So, guys, welcome to the F3 Knoxville podcast. This is a special edition. I am Steam. I'm missing one of my co-hosts, or two of my co-hosts, but have a all-star panel here with us today. And we are going to be covering a topic that is not new to F3 Nation, but has popped up recently a year afterwards. And so I'm going to let these high-impact men introduce themselves. We'll do a typical Namo-Rama on the show, and then I'll introduce the conversation we're about to have, and that you'll hear from these men. So go to my left.
Yeah. David Greer, 42, kickflip.
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 I'll go next. Tyson Canup, 42, Skeletor.
Skeletor.
Kevin Gray, 42, Bobbit.
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 And Ralton Emery, 50, Piston.
Piston. Respect. Gotta give you Hey, respect for all you guys on the call. Seriously, thank you for being here this evening. And the topic we're about to talk about is a tough one, and many of you on this call were very close to this event. So last year, we tragically lost an F3 brother, Cardinal, during his first workout. And so these men were able to walk with him for the short time he was in F3, and the impact that he had on F3, and in the past year we've seen the impact F3 Nation has poured out for the family and the community. And so what I wanted to do to start off is to get a few of these guys that were actually there on the day, on Cardinals VQ day, and just help us remember what that was like, and help us remember what that morning was like, showing up to an F3 workout, not knowing the series of tragic events that would ensue. So Bobbit and Skeletor would love to just hear from you guys. And once again, thank you for helping us walk through that again.
Sure. I feel appropriate to let Bobbit handle this question right here. Bobbit was our AOQ at the time, and probably had private conversations with Cardinal leading up to that VQ. So
Cardinal and I'd been kind of communicating a little bit back and forth about his VQ. He'd sent me a Google Doc that he had, and so we'd kind of been giving some feedback and all that kind of stuff, and he kind of wanted me to see it before he did it, and thought things looked pretty good. So I had a copy of what he had written down, his total plan, which came in handy later on. I think we'd kind of been communicating a little bit back and forth through that. And that morning, I'm usually the second person there. Piston's starting to smile because he's always the first that's there at Rampart. And so I came, and I think Piston was out that day, had something going on with work. And so I showed up kind of expecting to see Piston, and didn't. And saw Cardinal, and he was kind of laying things out there and kind of getting things ready. And as I came up, the typical fist bump, good morning kind of thing. And he was nervous and excited at the same time. He was proud of what he'd come up with, and he'd kind of bounced stuff off of me, and I felt really good about it. And he had his yellow sheets that were already laminated, had the Rampart logo at the very top corner on those. I mean, he'd spent some time. And we kind of talked a little bit about that, and talked about how proud his wife was of him. We talked a little bit about his journey leading up. So it really, the moment that morning felt exciting for him. It felt like his moment, And so nothing felt ominous. I mean, it was going to be a good one, and I think that was what was coming over me. And I was proud of him. I just was ready for that moment for Card. There's nothing that makes an AO more proud and an AOQ more proud than when somebody's starting their VQ. So it was a good morning. He just had this excited energy about him, and guys were showing up, and everybody was coming in, and everybody was excited for him. And I think it was good. I remember when we started the warm up, he was a little bit out of breath, and And that's the excited energy. You know what I mean? Like I'm out of breath when I'm excited and kind of doing that. So I didn't think anything of that. He just led well. I mean, I knew he was excited about what he was doing, you know. So we went through the instructions, we went through the warm up, you know, the disclaimer and all that kind of stuff. And he was nailing it. I mean, I was really excited about his leadership that morning. I guess our first real exercise was 5 burpees. And I had kind of gotten through them quick and was ready. I guess I was on the ground doing big boy sit-ups. And I just heard this crumple. I mean, you know this sound when a body hits the ground. And something came over me at that point, and it was, who was that? You know, I mean, there was a frightened shock because I just knew what that noise was. And as I sat up, Skeletor was right there at him. I mean, Skeletor was the first one to get to him, and Wingman said he just kind of went. He saw him going down slow. You know, he just kind of was going down. It didn't seem like a hard hit, but we thought he'd passed out. And so Skeletor was kind of working to make sure that he was waking up, and I called out, you know, somebody check his pulse. And that was when we knew something's wrong. So I called 911. They told us to start compressions. Skeletor was on it. Skeletor did a great job. But man, it turned into a swirl at that point. What started off to be just an exciting, beautiful morning, you know, turned into something else, and it turned completely surreal. It felt, you know, 5 minutes felt like an hour. You know, there was just, this can't be happening kind of thoughts going on and all that. When the EMSs showed up, one of the first things I said, and we desperately needed to hear this, was that you guys did everything right. I just needed to know, you know, and so they came and were working, and in that moment, I just remember, you know, the faces of my guys around me, the helplessness that we felt. I'll never forget that feeling of not being able to do anything. And we just gathered up and prayed. I think Skeletor said, let's go over by the flag and let's kneel and pray. And so we just went over there to pray for a while, and minute by minute, just going and going and going, until finally they took him in the ambulance to the hospital. I think somewhere in there, Feeney was able to get Cardinal's wife's phone number to let her know what's going on. And so some of us decided we were going to go over there and meet at the hospital and be there. So that's kind of the scene that morning. Skeletor, you want to talk about the hospital, or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's just tough to get back in that mind space of that day, that morning, and the way it happened. And I'll just add on to what you said. As we were going through those motions directed by 911, and you mentioned the helplessness. As I'm there, I'm looking across at Mathlete, and he and I are just we're communicating, but we're also just looking at each other, and it's that helpless feeling where you're doing everything you know to do, everything you've been told to do, yet the conditions don't change. And I'm looking up at different guys during that whole process, and it's the same look, the same feeling. I've never been in a situation like that before. And I don't ever wish to be in a situation like that again. But I told somebody the other day that, you know, I had brothers checking in on me on the 11th, just shooting messages and texting back and forth. Hey, just wanted to check in on you. I told one of the guys that I wish I hadn't lived through that. You know, it was a tough thing, but it made me stronger, and it gave me confidence in a moment like that I had never gained with training. You know, I've been through CPR training and AED training and first aid training. But there's nothing like actually living through an event like that to help you understand if you're a fight or flight kind of guy. And the guys that were there, those are all fight guys. And I think that's F3. Those are all fight guys.
Yeah.
They're willing to be there and do the hard thing. And the kind of man that shows up for F3, they're all fight guys. So that's another thing that stood out for me, just living through that moment. Arriving at the hospital, I really didn't know what to expect, just because of the way that Cardinal left in the ambulance. I think it was Bobbitt, Feeney, and myself, or was Wingman there as well? Maybe just the three of us, and then
It was, yeah.
yeah. Just walking in, I think I was the last to arrive out of the three of us, and Mrs. Cardinal was sitting there with her friend, and obviously this is the first time I'm meeting her, and just to walk in the room and look at her, walk over and hold her hand and say, "I'm so sorry. We did everything we could. We're here to help." And the only thing she said is, "What's your F3 name?" And I said, "Skeletor." And just through the tears and through the pain, she said, "He really loved you." There was a bond there, even though it was just 6 weeks or so that he was with us. He wasn't one of those guys that started and you didn't hear from him until the next beatdown. There was always two-way communication between mate, and he probably had that with other guys too. I'm not saying I'm the only one, but we had a communication outside of F3. Like immediately, he was asking me questions, and we were, working through things through the beatdown. Each and every time he was there, and for her to, in that moment of pain, just look up and tell me he really loved you. It meant so much, and it made me and my heart feel better. I don't know what it did for her, but it certainly made me feel like I had done everything that I could, because I had these questions in my mind. Did I do everything that I was supposed to do? Could I have done more? Could we have been quicker? And for her to say that to me, it was just a gentle understanding that he loved me, he loved us, and we did everything that we could. And I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if she was going to be upset with us, because I knew that she loved F3 up to that moment. It's hard to love something that takes your spouse. So I didn't know how things were going to go down, if F3 was going to be welcome in the room there. But she was open arms from day one, with all three of us there in the hospital room, or not the waiting room. And we really just supported her the best we could with silent prayers. There was nothing more to say in that moment, other than just us three guys that were there to sit next to each other, desperately praying for our friend, and for somebody to come out of that hallway and say, "We got him back." But that just wasn't the Lord's plan, and that didn't happen. So that's the way I remember the hospital. Bobbitt, Kick, I know you showed up later, right?
I did.
Well, and I'll get to that part. I think there was a point where wasn't really anything left to do, where we'd gotten the bad news and everybody kind of had trickled out, and some people had trickled in, and I think I was coming. I was waiting on a chaplain. I was a chaplain at that hospital, and I was waiting on a friend of mine to get there. I just needed somebody. I couldn't be chaplain in that moment, And he had come. We'd gone back and sat with Andrea, and we were coming out. Everything was kind of getting quiet and closing down, and I'm just thinking, what do I do? And to see Kickflip's face coming across the parking lot, to see that leader show up changed the scene for me. I mean, I was thinking like, this is over. Like, not only am I grieving a wonderful guy like Cardinal not being here on this earth with us anymore, but I'm also thinking this is done. Like, this is over. Like, F3 is it. Like, this hasn't happened. We can't go on. Nobody's going to show up for a workout after this, So I'm thinking these friends, we're all going to split, So I was starting to think like, what happens after this point? And Kickflip's leadership, showing up on scene, I think just brought some calm to me. And I had tried to get a hold of him. I think there was some phone tag or something. It was during when a beatdown would be, and I left a frantic message and didn't get this call back. I just got the person there. And Kickflip drove all the way across Knoxville to get there to us. So there was something really good about that. And we hugged, and I said, Kickflip, I don't know what we're going to do after this. He's like, you don't worry about that right now. And so his calming presence, and I think there was another point where Piston showed up and saw him coming across the parking lot, and I almost wanted to run like in a movie just to get to that guy and give him a big hug, because I knew he knew what was going on. And in a tragic moment like that, to be next to Skeletor through all of that, and to see the men, the way that we drew close together and drew strength from each other in a time when I think it would be the most lonely thing in the world to lose somebody when it's just you. But we have a lot of guys that we depend on and lean on. And I don't want anybody to ever have to go through something like that. But having gone through something like that in F3 specifically, to see what those relationships really are and what those really can become in the face of tragedy, I think was something that I'll never forget through that. So I think that was really important and good.
Well, thank you both for reliving that. I know that's not easy to put yourself back into that space, like Skeletor said. And thank you for providing that context too. And Kickflip, I'd love to hear from you first, just kind of where your head was at coming to the hospital, seeing these guys, having that moment of embrace. And Bob, I love the way you put it, seeing Kickflip and Piston walk across the parking lot, the scene changed, right? So talk to me what that was like for you.
Yeah. I think it was Bob that used the word a few minutes ago, surreal. It really did feel surreal. I remember that. I was across town at the Quackin' that morning. They were doing their shovel flag handoff. And so we did that, and I get back and to my truck and had a couple of voicemails, called me immediately, right? And just figured out kind of what was going on and started heading that way. It just felt the whole drive, the morning at the hospital, all of that felt so surreal. Bobby, you said a second ago, I mean, I remember standing there with you, and it seems now to be kind of a silly thing. But in the moment, we really were thinking, like, what happens now? Like, did this just implode? What happens to F3? What happens to Rampart? And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The deciding factor over the next several days. I know you guys got together for lunch that day, and then throughout the next several days, weeks, months, the deciding factor for why Rampart didn't implode is you and you and you, the three men that we're looking at on these screens. You were the deciding factor for why Rampart didn't disintegrate. It really got inspired. And so you guys, your leadership, the compassion and the strength that you led with was just second to none. World class. So we honor you for that.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
So obviously that's a day that no one expected, and as tragic as it was, something happened after that day. After Cardinal went to be with the Lord, he had an exact number of days on this earth, and and the beautiful part of the story is a story that's still being told about his ministry and who he was as a man and how much he loved F3. And following that tragic day, Piston, I'd love for you just to walk us through that massive amount of support that we saw from F3 Nation, both from a virtual perspective, from a relational perspective, and then from a convergence perspective, which I know you were a huge part of. So I'd love to hear just what that was like for you, and specifically with the convergence too. I know that was a very special time for all of the men here.
Yeah, it was well, to back up, and I was late getting to the hospital. It was funny because I was the one who recruited Cardinal, and he aged him.
Mhm.
And so I was looking forward to his VQ. The issue is my knee had swollen the night before, and I actually sent him a note, and I said, buddy, I'm so sorry. He said, no worries. This is the first of many.
Mhm.
And so, my morning was a lot like everyone else's on the call. It's tragic, but it was so just unreal, the amount of support that we saw. I mean, Skeletor, Bobbitt, and I participated in a COT from a group on the West Coast on that Friday. We had messages from guys that I've worked with for years that I didn't know did F3 in Ohio, saying, hey, we heard about this Cardinal. He's close to where you live. Do you know him? And I got to, relate the story. And it was really just amazing, the outpouring of support, the outpouring of, we're here for you guys. And that, to this day, I still get choked up on that. And then when we made the decision to finish his VQ for him on the convergence on that Saturday, you have to forgive me. But we usually at Rampart, when we show up, there's very little lighting. And I was pulling up with my son, and just these massive bright lights of all the LEDs, all the baseball field, everything was lit up.
Mhm.
And I told my son, I said, Stetson, today's going to be special.
Mhm.
And to have 170 guys at Rampart that day, honoring a friend, honoring someone that I knew well before F3 as a friend, as a pastor, and someone who reached out, like Skeletor said, he dove right in really, really quick. No complaints. He was there, and to see the amount of just support, and not just in numbers, but guys who truly cared for one another because of F3. I mean, these two guys that are here at Skeletor and Bobbitt. Yeah, I've known Skeletor for a while, but Bobbitt and I, just got to know each other through F3. But they're my brothers. I'd do anything for them, and that's the camaraderie that we felt that day, that morning. And it was extremely, extremely cold. It was snowing, kind of muddy on the field. Didn't matter. We were going to do this workout. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. We saw the amount physically of guys that showed up for that convergence. And you just felt something different about that workout. Kickflip, could you share a little bit about, maybe from the F3 Nation perspective, what we all saw around the region, around the globe, really, and then we were able to put together some I think some very impactful systems to allow guys and their family and F3 Nation to support Cardinal's life and just this community. What did that look like from the F3 Nation?
Sure. I'll talk about it, but I'll say this: I pointed to these three guys that we honored for their leadership of that local AO after the crisis, during and after this crisis. We gave them certificates of commendation, but we also gave out 2 other certificates of commendation. It was to this man, am I right, Steen, and to Blindside. And for them, it was really the outward look. It was the representation of this local region to the international F3 community, and they really made us shine and represented us really, really, really well. So I'll talk about it, but it was really all of your doing and Blindsides and a few others. But really, you guys carried the water. But what we saw was Piston, what you said just a second ago, just kind of gave me goosebumps when you said, Cardinal said this when he talked to you that night before. This is just the first of many. Yeah. He didn't know it, but what he said was true. Yeah. What he had planned the next day was the first of many, many, many scores, or probably hundreds of times that his workout was done across the world and across the nation, across the world. People have done the Cardinal VQ workout. Within a week or so of that event, it had been done countless times. I think Blindside at one time was trying to keep track. And I think he just lost track. It was lots and lots. And men wearing the red shirts, sending in their pictures. One of the most touching things I saw, I think, was put together by Italian Job, or maybe he just got somebody else, but it was a collage of pictures made up. And I mean, it was like hundreds of pictures of men doing the Cardinal VQ workout with the red on and all this kind of stuff. And then you zoom way out, and these hundreds and hundreds of pictures make a collage of Taylor Phelps's face with this big smile, and like, wow, that's really cool. So there's a couple things like that, just really, really neat. Of course, we set up a GoFundMe account. We set that up the day of the crisis, the tragedy, thinking that we might just help with the funeral expenses or something. I remember setting a limit, shooting for let's shoot for $1,000, and I now see that as profoundly short-sighted because the F3 Nation showed up in a real big way. And what we ended up raising was just shy of $110,000 for her. Every cent went to Andrea. So yeah, just the men of F3 Nation showed up in an incredible way. Countless nameless men, but then also a couple of men at the national level. Yeah, really incredible.
Thank you. Yeah. And so today is the 14th. So we just went through his anniversary of when he passed, and so when I brought up this idea, I wanted to not let us forget what that day was like, especially for the guys that were there. And once again, thank you so much for helping us relive this together. And there is something I think incredibly special about F3 Nation, about F3 Knoxville, F3 ROCO. A year later, this has all impacted our lives tremendously, some in very different ways. And you still see the red shirts, you still see Cardinals workout being done, the laminated cards of his workout, all over, not just Knoxville, but all over F3 Nation as well. And so just as we get close to closing our conversation in time here, I would love to just maybe hear from everyone a year later. Why is it important that we remember not just the man Cardinal was and then the legacy he left for us, but I think this transcends a incredibly tragic event. This has, as Piston said, has brought us together in powerful ways as brothers, and I think it helped F3 Nation, helped F3 guys maybe realize that this is obviously more than just a workout. So a year later, just reflecting on the impact he had in your life and our lives as well, where's your head at as we go through this again and kind of do his workout and remember the life he led, and any encouragement you would potentially offer to F3 Nation or similar people?
Well, I'll jump in first. One of the things that encourages me is Rocco's been blessed. We've formed our own region, grew from just Rampart to others and other AOs, and we launched one very close to where Cardinal used to live, and the fitting name, we call it the Birdhouse. And I had the honor of being the AOQ there. But when we planted the flag, I told everybody that was there, I'm not the first AOQ for Birdhouse. That's Cardinal. And we just want to continue to do for other men what he did for us. And, Andrea put out an article where she talked about, that morning and saying, because Cardinal had some health issues previous and they almost lost him a little bit before this. And, I was there in the hospital when she, questioned why didn't the Lord take him then? And the answer is because he hadn't found F3 yet. And, she's now encouraging us to find other men like her husband to carry this message, to help impact and live out a life that impacts other men to be better men, to be better leaders, to be better fathers, to be better friends, husbands. And so that, as the second AOQ of Birdhouse, that encourages me tremendously.
Yeah, good word, Piston. For me, I knew it was going to be a momentous day, a year, celebrating Cardinal a year later. I don't think I realized how much F3 Nation was going to again play a huge part in celebrating him that day. I didn't realize that so many people were going to be interested in re-performing his VQ, and I've heard since then that there are regions and AOs out there that have done it multiple times over the past year, not just to celebrate a year later, but to remember him through the months. And so it's probably late November. I started getting messages from men in F3 Nation. Hey, brother, we're just thinking about what leads up to celebrating Cardinal this year, and we want to again memorialize him and honor him by performing his VQ. Please let us know if there's going to be an effort to do something big. Just how we can be part of it. Everybody just wanted to be part of it and get out there and do his VQ again. And that struck me as it's just so rare to have people across the nation, across the globe that have, we've never met a lot of those men, most of those men, but they truly care. And like Piston was saying on the day of, I know a lot of guys in F3 Knoxville, but I didn't know half the guys that showed up here at Rampart on the 13th, 14th last year. And the way that men were showing up, Rampart was a little set aside, and we were gathered up together, and we just had, I had guys coming up to me and they just asked me my name. Your standard F3 introduction. You fist bump and say your name. And when a guy had no idea who he was, heard the name Skeletor, it turned into a fist bump, straight into a hug, and I love you, brother. It was amazing just that transition, knowing that I and the other men with me were there and we were his friends. It was just this extra level of care, and that was just something special that started happening again digitally, approaching the 11th this year, and it was just an amazing thing to, we did do our celebration memorial workout at Birdhouse on the 11th, Cardinals AO. We had 17 guys there, and it was just to remember him and read the letter that Andrea had sent us, his wife had sent us. For me, it was just really impactful to look around and see all the same faces that were there that day when we lost Cardinal, and a couple more that we've gained a decent amount of guys since then, and even the guys that are in F3 Roco that didn't know Cardinal, they know the story and they know what F3 Nation did throughout that story, and they're in there and they love Cardinal just as much as we do and did. It makes no difference. They wanted to do that VQ to honor him because they know how much he means to us. And that encourages me just to know that those guys that are there that are interested in honoring him, they do it because he was one of us.
For me, I'm there were dark moments throughout that whole experience. From seeing the helplessness on each other's faces to being in the hospital to not knowing where this thing was going to go and what was going to happen after this, to a year later look back at what happened, and the deep impact of what happened. It made across the nation and across the world. I mean, I remember getting stuff from Kenya, from guys in Kenya asking questions and sending videos and doing that, and to hear these accents from across, halfway across the world saying Cardinal's name, to have been men who have seen that kind of darkness and what God can do with that, changes you, I think. And I think a year later, just thinking about all that, I mean, I was up the other morning kind of getting ready. It was the day I was going to drive up to Kingston or Harriman and go to the anniversary BQ, and my wife just came up and she was wearing red. And I'm like, "You're wearing red today?" And she goes, "Yeah, I'm wearing red." And like, I just choked up, and she's, "Are you okay?" And I was just reliving all the good, the highs and the lows and all of it. And when you take in all that, just the love for that dude, and just the love that those guys didn't know we had for each other until we met a moment like that. And then the bond, not only at Rampart, but through F3 Knoxville, and the bond that we have from guys that wear these black shirts with F3 on them across the world. When you take all that in, your heart just gets so full and so heavy, and it's like it's too much information, for our soul to be able to handle. But we're people that have lived through something like that, and you can't unlearn the fact that God can do something incredible with your darkest, most hopeless, scary moments. Churchill said something like, when you're going through hell, just keep going. And that was it. Like, I think embraces from other men around us at each one of those moments. Just say, keep going, keep looking, because something really is going to be good on the other side of this. And so a year later, it's odd. I was going back through reading my journals and stuff that I was saying. It's odd to go back and just see the the desperation for some kind of good news, and to be on this side of it and be like, never, ever, ever would have seen any of that coming, you know? So there were, and even in the midst of that, there were flashes of goodness that were just trying to make themselves evident. You know, Skeletor, when you're talking about Cardinal's wife asking our names, I remember a flash of a smile for a second, you know, a connection, recognition. Throughout the whole thing, it's just God's hope was present now that I look back on that. And I think being people that have seen that know that, gives us a different kind of strength for moving forward, for what else life has for us.
All right. Thank you. Kickflip, you want to add anything?
Yeah, man. So Steam, you asked the question, why is it important that we remember? And I was actually brought back. I was reflecting this week and went all the way back to it was a message that Andrea wrote. Let me pull it up. I've actually got a screenshot saved on my phone. Give me 1 second. This was 8:41 a.m. on Wednesday. And so she had been in the hospital maybe at, let's say, 6 a.m. So this is less than 3 hours after she found out that her husband was going to die or had died. And let me just pause and say, man, the strength and grace of that woman is profound.
Amen.
Amen.
I have been floored by her so many times over the last year. Every time I see her, the strength of that woman is like, I can't relate. I couldn't be like her in her situation. But she wrote this less than 3 hours after she found out that she had lost her husband. It goes on. It's kind of long, but about the middle of this message, she says, Taylor had really struggled with loneliness. It's so hard to be a pastor and your only friends are your church members. He had been happier than I had seen him in so long when he found you guys. Thank you for making his last days bright. That's just 3 hours later. And those 3 sentences have haunted me for a year now. The way that she said that. And it really makes me think about men like him. Why is it important to remember? Men like him. I think about men who are vocational pastors or in leadership positions where they feel like they have to live a perfect life. That there is no room for that man to have flaws or to be vulnerable. And what a lonely existence that could be for that man. If he feels like there's no way for him to be fully known by any other man, how lonely of a life that could be. And so this thing with Cardinal and those 3 sentences that she wrote about him, and finding F3 unlocked something in him. It gave him a place to come out and be known, to just be a man and not the pastor, right? To just be a dude around a bunch of other dudes. And that freed him and it unlocked something in him. And it gave him a joy that he hadn't had, she said, in years. And I've known other men in F3 are in similar situations. They're vocational pastors, ministers, priests, or maybe they're just in a position where they feel like they have to live a perfect life. They're in a leadership position, elevated among, and just, I can't make a mistake. I can't have sin in my life. I can't. And when you come out to F3, the gloom is the great equalizer. It's like, out here, you're just one of us. It doesn't matter what you do for a living, who you are as a leader. Out here, and in fact, the quickest way to stand out as awkward in F3 is to come with a facade on and try and be something you're not. You're going to stick out like a sore thumb because that's not how we do it, right? To come out in the gloom and be allowed to be authentic is amazing. So that's kind of a long way of saying what has haunted me is just having compassion and empathy for these men who are vocational pastors, leaders, who feel like they can't be open and transparent. Man, I really want to provide a safe place for those men to do that. And what has happened with Cardinal has really just kind of ignited that passion in me. I want F3 to be that for more men like him. Yeah.
Thank you. Guys, thank you all. I honor you. Thank you for engaging in this conversation, all of you, and then sharing this with F3 Nation. And hopefully we can take this into our own spheres of influence in F3, outside of F3 as well. We all know someone that could use a bobbit in their life, could use a Skeletor or a piston or a kickflip in their life, and needs that community, right? So thank you for your time. We honor you guys for just walking the walk this past year.
Thank
Can I
you,
say
brother.
one more thing? I see you get your finger on the stop button. Let me say one more thing and just give honor to one more man who's not on with us, but Ralph from is it St. Charles or St. Peter's, Missouri?
Yes.
500 miles away from us. This man has reached out, and I just want to show honor to that man for using his gift to tell Cardinal's story so well. I mean, that has really made the story come alive to countless men and women and families across the world. And then for his thoughtfulness, I think he was the one who came up with this idea to have Cardinal Jr. do the 1 millionth Maba burpee on the anniversary of his father's death. And so I admire that guy for his skill and his craft and for his thoughtfulness.
What we can do, we'll put his link that he shares the stories of Cardinal in the show notes, so people can find that. Just that's easily accessible. Yeah, he has a gift for that too. So awesome, guys.
So as we close again,
final thought,
Steve, I think maybe it's appropriate that we read the letter that Andrea wrote to F3 Nation just before we sign off here, and that this letter is linked in the message that you'll put out there with Ralph's newsletter. So I'll just read what she wrote to us. It says, to the men of F3, I'm so thankful that you have chosen to take this day. She wrote this on the 11th this year, to take this day that represents so much pain, sorrow, and heartache for me and turn it into something positive. Thank you for remembering Taylor, for continuing to bless and encourage my kids and I, and for being the light of Christ in Roane County. I can't be there with you today. I have to do what's best for my kids and their healing. But please know that my heart is with you as you celebrate my husband's homegoing. Just knowing that you are there together, just like you were on the day he went to be with Jesus, makes this day easier to face. The togetherness is what he loved about F3. You were what he had been searching for and needed in his life. I have no doubt that there are other men that are still searching for a brotherhood like yours. So don't stop. Keep going. You may not realize it, but God is using you to change lives. I remember walking into the hospital waiting room where so many of you had gathered after I had just said goodbye to my best friend. I looked at a member of our church, and asked, why did God let him live last summer just to take him now? We had almost lost Taylor the summer before due to a kidney abscess. I just couldn't understand why I had to go through that experience only to lose him a few months later. She didn't have an answer for me that day. No one had any answers that day, only questions. However, she called me a few weeks later and reminded me of what I had asked. She felt like God had given her the answer. She said it was because he hadn't met F3 yet. God waited to take him until they were in your life to take care of you, and she was right. God waited so that I would have you to walk with me through the darkest valley of my life. Thank you. I'll never forget what you've done for us. We love each of you. You are family in Christ. Andrea, Clay, and Evie Phelps.
Thank you for reading that.
yeah, thank you, Steen, for hosting this conversation and letting us talk about Taylor Cardinal Phelps, our friend.
Absolutely. Hi, guys. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna pause the recording.